Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We are so excited to have everyone visiting with us. My name is Jeremy Bird. I'm the Director of Marketing for Envision Technology Advisors. I'm kind of just here today to introduce everybody and get everyone excited. Also do a little quick housekeeping. There is a feature in GoToWebinar here, which is the platform we are using that allows you to send us questions. So throughout today's presentation, if there's a topic, if there's a comment made that you have a question on, feel free to use that functionality. Or if you want to save your questions for the end, the plan is to have a little bit of time at the end to answer those questions with our panel of experts here. And let me introduce kind of our moderator for today's session, Henry Silva. So Henry's a partner and COO at KLR, one of the largest accounting and business consulting firms in New England. Henry works closely with Andrea, one of our other panelists, in leading the firm's information technology practice group. Henry has a 20-year track record in assisting small and medium businesses improve performance and realize their potential. Henry, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here today. I'm looking forward to continuing our conversation from a couple of weeks ago about protecting your business from cyber attacks. If you recall, on October 13th, we began our conversation with a webinar featuring Envision's ethical hackers, who showed us how easy it is for hackers to take over your network. Of course, that is what these good guys are hired to do. However, there are bad guys out there working every day to hack our networks and take over vital information. Now more than ever, your business needs a strategy to reduce your cyber risk. The cost of that cyber attack can run well into the millions. I'm joined today by Jason Albuquerque, COO of Envision Technologies, and Andrea, a partner with KLR, who heads up the firm's IT technology practice group. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Today's session is going to focus on providing actionable strategies that you can put into place to greatly reduce your risk of a cyber attack. So without further ado, let's get right to it. I know personally, as COO, after last session, I've had a number of sleepless nights thinking of what's going on potentially out there. Guys, what are 2 or 3 items that might concern you in the current cyber environment? Jason, let's start with you.
Sure. So, as a cybersecurity professional by trade, I really try to keep the pulse of what's happening from a threat intelligence and a global cyber risk perspective. And when you ask me what keeps me up at night, there's really 2 major things. Number 1 is supply chain attack, so third-party risk. From a business risk and a cyber risk perspective, you're not always the end target. Sometimes you may be the means to an end. And we've seen that with some recent strategies from these cyber criminals, where they're leveraging third-party organizations to gain that one-to-many attack surface. So they'll attack an organization so that way they can get their hands on that organization's customers, maybe their donor information, maybe their supply chain connections into other systems if they're doing business to business. We saw a lot of that in really coming out of Russia. They mastered that supply chain attack scenario, but other countries are catching up. You're seeing countries like China come into play there, where they're bolstering their capabilities from a supply chain attack perspective. So really having that visibility into your third parties, who you're doing business with, who you're connected with, who you're sharing information with, and who your technology providers are, that's top of mind every day for me and the customers that I work with, making sure that you're solidifying your security strategy by looking at your third parties. The other place is really our capabilities from a cybersecurity perspective. Now, this is something that's kept me up at night for many, many years. Right now, we're leading into 3.5 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs in the world. That's concerning to me. That means we don't have the talent to protect our organizations, to protect our government entities. And really, it's going to take a village for us to get through that. Over the course of the last 3 years, I host a podcast on cybersecurity as well called Business Security Weekly, and we've been on an annual basis looking at this talent gap. And I remember about 3.5 years ago saying, wow, we're about to reach 2 million unfilled jobs. Then the next year, we're we're about to hit, 3 million unfilled jobs. Now we're projecting by the end of this year, 3.5 unfilled cybersecurity jobs in the world. That concerns me. That weakens, if I look at it from us nationally, that weakens us from a geopolitical perspective and a cybersecurity perspective. Nation state attacks are empowering cyber criminal activities because they're mimicking what these nation state attackers are doing. And really, there's no repercussions or sanctions right now. The federal government is starting to catch up, but we've seen China earlier this year, and if anybody's heard of it, it's called the Hafnium attack. It was basically a show of force. It was a show of dominance. There was no monetary value there. There was no, cyber criminal activity from a financial benefit perspective. It was 100% a show of dominance on the fact of China, and they were going after things like intellectual property and communications of organizations. So, really, again, to summarize it, third-party risk, supply chain attacks, and really bolstering our cybersecurity capabilities and trying to get cybersecurity professionals, more in the world, engaged, educated, and really building that workforce. Those are the two things that concern me the most.
Dan, what about you?
Well, I sleep well at night, quite frankly, because all my clients are no, I'm just kidding. Let me just touch upon, Jason, talked about the supply chain, and let's extend that out, right? You've got the vendor side, but you've got business partners you're working with on a day-to-day basis, and they're an external party. They may have access into your systems. So it's not, it's the supply side, and similarly, it's also the business partners. That concerns me. A couple other items that, I'm seeing with the clients that we're involved with every day is, one, there's really no risk assessment, a good risk assessment that they're doing. So how can you develop an approach to sort of protecting yourself if you don't know what you're protecting? I always tell clients the first thing you got to do is just simply take an inventory of your assets. Assets are data, assets are physical devices. So it concerns me. I'm not seeing that as much as I would have thought we'd see it as we sit here in 2021. The other thing is people are sort of confusing an incident response plan with a disaster recovery plan. Now, if anybody that lives in New England the last 24 hours, obviously we had, and depending upon where your businesses were, you probably had to invoke some piece of your DR plan because of power outages and what have you. But an IRP, or an incident response plan, as it relates to cybersecurity, takes that a step further. And sometimes when we go into clients, they're just confusing the DR with the IRP, and an incident response plan involves a lot more people that might be in the disaster recovery plan. You might need legal involved. You might need your insurance company involved. You might need marketing involved. So I really, that's concerning me a little. And then the other thing is, I'm starting to see people going to AWS, Azure, whomever. They're not prepared for it. They're great solutions, and it's great to outsource, but those are sophisticated environments. And what concerns me is, and Jason, maybe you could touch upon this, when you get into like an AWS or an Azure, you've got things called security groups. Okay, and what is a security group? Well, think of it as a firewall that's controlling traffic in the cloud. If you're not adequately trained on doing that, you can set yourself up for a lot of issues or potential issues. So I love the cloud. I love AWS. I love Azure. I think it's a great place, but I'm a little concerned about the lack of training that I'm seeing in our organizations that we look at when they do that. And, there's other things that we can talk about as the hour goes on, but those are pretty much, in addition to the vendor and the supply chain piece, where I would stop.
Yeah, I mean, Dan, just to your point, from a cloud perspective, they're not the silver bullet. Migrating to the cloud does not transfer your risk to another party, right? What it does is it gives you a level of economies of scale and shared services that you can leverage, shared compute power, taking some of that capital expense and moving it over to operational expense. But at the end of the day, if you read the fine print in the contracts that you have with these organizations, their job is to protect their infrastructure, not to protect what you build on their infrastructure. That's up to you as an organization to protect the servers, the software, the applications, the data that lives within their environment. So, I mean, equate it to this. You can lease a car, but the leasing company is not gonna protect you from getting that car broken into and your wallet stolen out of it, right? So at the end of the day, you're leasing equipment from them. You're leasing performance and compute power, but it's not their job to protect it. It's the organization's job who's building that infrastructure within that environment to protect it.
So Dan, you mentioned firewall. I've heard people say, I have a firewall. Why should I be concerned?
Well, there's 5 years ago, there's firewalls, and now we're in an environment where you have still have the, for those organizations, the actual hard firewall device, but now you're into areas of WAFs or web application firewalls. I touched earlier upon, network security groups and things like that. So it's, firewalls are good, and obviously you should have it, but you've got the same issues you have with everything else with a firewall. Is it patched, right? Are you in the current version? Have you licensed IDS or intrusion detection or intrusion prevention on the firewall? Are those licenses current? Have you looked at your rules? And I'm sure Jason could touch upon this, but we did an engagement once for a client, I won't say their name, where it was a firewall audit. They must have had, no lie, over 10,000 rules in the firewalls. And what does that mean? That means obviously they're not monitoring their firewall configuration on a regular basis. Whenever we look at a firewall and we see that the rule name or the rule name temporary, that sends up red flags, right? So you've got an active temporary rule. So firewalls aren't a panacea per se, but you just, like everything else, got to keep on top of it, make sure it's patched, make sure you're reviewing the rules. We have clients with firewalls that when they have a customer, the customer sets up a specific tunnel for them in the firewall. Well, if that customer is no longer involved with you, what's the process to get that tunnel disabled or deactivated? So, having a firewall is great. But making sure that it's patched, it's current, it's reviewed on a continuous basis, and oh, by the way, maybe bring in Jason or someone to pen test or do something on it to make sure what I'm talking about, is true.
And honestly, that firewall is one piece of a much larger puzzle, right? It's that one piece of a 500-piece puzzle, especially these days. If you talked to me 10 years ago, a firewall was an important piece to it. But that's back in the day when we actually had a perimeter of what we were securing, right? Our four walls of our organization. Look where we are today. We're in such a hybrid workforce, hybrid network architecture and technology architecture. I've seen organizations spend $80,000, $90,000 on high-end enterprise firewalls, but they're not looking at those other pieces of the puzzle. So think of it this way. You can go buy a Browning safe home security door for $6,000 with a $1,000 Baldwin lock on it, right? That's Bluetooth capable. But when your windows are open, your bulkhead is open, you're keeping your crown jewels in your shed, your keys are in your vehicle and the doors are open to your vehicle, you're not going to be safe. You just have one really expensive door and a lock, and everything else is left wide open.
And this goes back to the risk assessment that I talked about earlier, right, Jason? I mean, you can invest in the top of the line stuff, but A, do you need it, right? Based upon your risk assessment. You don't know how to protect something until you do that risk assessment. And, one of the things I know Jason's group is and my group is, we're very pragmatic in how we approach stuff like this. You don't need to buy the Rolls Royce when, I don't know, the Cadillac will do.
Yeah, no, 100% agreed. I mean, we look at it this way. What is an organization's full digital footprint? Where are the crown jewels? What do they need to protect? How are those assets classified, right, from a business risk perspective? And then you build a strategy on protecting them. Because, again, everything may not be within those four walls that you consider crown jewels. And you need a holistic plan in protecting them. And the only way to do that is to know the current state of affairs, figure out what those gaps are to your cyber resilience, and start that journey on securing your security posture within your organization.
Speaking of cyber resilience, Jason, under the new administration, Department of Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas said that organizations must have cybersecurity at the forefront of their strategy as a business imperative. He went on to talk about cyber resilience. In order for businesses to be more cyber resilient, what are some core functions that organizations can focus on to begin with, Jason?
Sure. And I will say, that conversation that Secretary Mayorkas had was this summer, right? I mean, national news put it out there blatantly that cybersecurity isn't a should have, it's a must have, absolute imperative for every organization, right? So it's not even a question. And really, there's a lot of best practices out there, but Dan hit the nail on the head right from the beginning. Identify what you have, right? That's a big piece of the start of a framework of business resilience. I'm a big proponent of NIST cybersecurity framework. Dan, I know you are as well, to be able to build your program. And really, that the definition in the domains are identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Those are 5 domains that you can start to focus on to really start building your organization's resiliency. And identifying is knowing your assets, knowing where risk lies within your organization from your digital footprint, protecting that with things like access controls and data security and maintenance, right? Dan mentioned patching earlier. Maintenance of those technologies is extremely important to protect. And then detecting things like any anomalies or events that may be happening within your organization that aren't normal behavior in your network or for your users. And then having that capability to respond if something does happen. So that way you minimize, and in the military we called it the blast area. You minimize that blast area, you minimize that blast zone, so there's not a lot of pain that you're going to endure from an uptime perspective, or worst case scenario, breach of data, right? I mean, that's something that you want to make sure is not happening. So being able to respond to that and quickly contain any threats is extremely important. And then having your business continuity and disaster recovery plan in play, because you do not want your business to be down. I've seen way too many organizations be down for weeks, if not months, because of a cyber attack, and every minute they're losing revenue. So having those really 5 domains that you can focus on, and working with a partner on how you can start strengthening each one of those domains is extremely important.
So Dan, one of your comments earlier, you talked about things being in the cloud. Most of my critical, I hear this very often, most of my critical operations are in the cloud. Isn't that their responsibility? Can you comment on that?
Jason very eloquently talked to that earlier. I like to tell clients, you can outsource functionality, but you can't outsource accountability. And it's unfortunate, but it's a fact of life. And what you need to do is, prior to signing on with these cloud providers, is take a look at what's going on. Take a look at what you're signing up to. But again, I got to go back to make sure you get adequate training on stuff like this. I am every day that I'm in a new client that, let's say, not to pick on AWS, but I'll pick on AWS. The AWS console, if anybody here is, on the webinar is familiar at all with it, it's a beast in terms of all the services and different ways of navigating and how you're trying to do it. Invariably, I'll be in an audit situation where I'm telling the client to show me this or show me that, and it takes them a while to hunt around to figure out how they did it, or worse, they accept default settings. Right? So let's take cloud out of this, for example. Back in the old days, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when you got a server shipped to your business, the first thing you do is you don't use the default system administrator username or password, right? Because that gets shipped with every product. You got to change it. Whenever you use a default in the cloud, gosh, you got to be careful to make sure that default is appropriate. And it's just concerning me, the training piece I'm really concerned about. Love the functionality, not so crazy about the lack of training.
Yeah, can I give you a follow-up on that? What should I do to monitor my business partners and vendors?
Well, All right, I'm not going to bring up risk assessment. We've beat that to death. But let's say this. I'm sure everybody watching or on this webinar, not everybody, but maybe some of you, based upon the size of your organization, maybe you outsource a piece of your IT services, right? Maybe you have a managed service provider because from an economic standpoint, it makes more sense based upon your environment, what have you. You outsource it, right? Well, going to Jason's point earlier, hopefully you're keeping an eye on what they're doing as part of your vendor management program. So what I would suggest is a couple of things. One, try to meet with them monthly. We've got clients with managed IT service providers that actually have a monthly meeting with them, and they go over tickets or issues that may have been covered. Hopefully the managed service provider provides them a report of, depending upon what they're doing, capacity, security issues, patching, AV, providing them that whole host. So that's a great way of doing due diligence, because if your provider can't give you this, then something's wrong, or you're certainly not getting what you pay for. But also, before you use any one of these providers, you should have a due diligence checklist worked up. I mean, we work with clients in helping them structure. Again, it depends upon the service they're going to provide, but it's a checklist. And we're auditors, right? We love checklists, but it's a good checklist to sort of mandate and investigate the capabilities of your supplier. And I don't know, Jason, you probably received those checklists, right?
No, I've received them. I've managed them. I've been on both sides of that, right? So ultimately, it's third-party vendor risk management, and I look at it really from two fashions, right? There's the pre-engagement diligence you can do, and then there's the ongoing diligence that you can do. So from pre-engagement, before you partner with an organization, number one, make sure that you have a master service agreement that includes things like privacy, confidentiality, security. Make sure that those partners have cybersecurity liability insurance. There's a multitude of things once you're in a place to build a partnership with an organization. Some of these baseline table stakes activities that your partner should have, right? So doing that level of diligence and making sure it's in contractually in your master services agreement. And then it's that ongoing relationship side where you're doing things like security information gathering exercises, where you have a list of questions based on your requirements as an organization of what you expect that vendor to be able to achieve, certain security controls, right? Certain best practices that they have in play. And what ends up happening is that becomes an attestation, right? So they attest that they have these security controls in place, and they're attesting to you as their customer that they're going to abide by those. So that's really that ongoing maintenance. And then make it part of your, your security assessments that you're doing either on a quarterly or annual basis. Make that third-party risk piece part of it. So if they have persistent VPN connections into your network, have that assessed. Have that quality of their remote hands or their ability to remote into your network, or if you're transferring data and sharing data with them, assess those technologies and those connections that they have into your organization to make sure that they're actually actioning on the controls that they say they do.
And just to add a couple more things, I'm not quite sure of the nature of the audience, but it's very easy to subscribe to information sharing and analysis centers, right? And these are aggregators of threats. Homeland Security has a classic one, but there's tons of organizations, or even by industry. So, if you're in the financial services industry, there is no doubt an ISAC for you. And all these do is it's daily heads up, right? So subscribe to that stuff, and then, go to your provider. If, what are we doing about this? Or is this something? Just a question, no show of hands, but how many of you that use an outsourced provider called them in December and asked them if they're a SolarWinds client? Back in December, SolarWinds had a big issue. It goes back to what Jason was talking about at the beginning of the supply chain. That was a supply chain hack. But, when I heard about that, actually I heard it about a couple of weeks before it was published, I get on the phone and told my clients to contact whoever they're using. Just ask them the question. Did you or do they use SolarWinds? So unfortunately, You know, you guys have got enough on your plate outside of cybersecurity to worry about just running the day-to-day business, but you can't get around it. But, you know, subscribe to some of these information aggregators. They're very helpful.
So Jason, after last session, I would think that to be successful, organizations need to think like the bad guys, right? However, good guys don't normally think like bad guys, do they?
So at the end of the day, we're in a scenario where, you know, we're lucky enough as Envision Technologies and KLR to have some really good superheroes who think like hackers, right? And that's the value that we bring to the table, because they are, honestly, they're superheroes. You know, these are folks who on the daily study threat actors, study threat intelligence, study the techniques and tactics and procedures that these cyber criminals are using, and really staying ahead of the technology. So that way they can identify vulnerabilities before they're even published, right, to the general public. So I think it's imperative these days. You know, we talked a little bit about some of the stats in the beginning of what's happening in the world, and we're talking about, you know, some of the communication that's happening from Department of Homeland Security about it's a must. It's, you know, it's something that we must be focusing on. But the struggle that we have is, again, we have the talent gap. So it takes a village these days, right? We can't do it by ourselves. It's about partnering with the right folks and really building that cybersecurity posture as an ecosystem. You know, Dan, you talked about ISACs. ISACs are an important piece of security posture in a program. So that way you get that information. And honestly, if you don't have your own security team, partner with a good cybersecurity organization that can help you through this, right? Help you through the journey. They're connected to the threat intelligence organizations like the ISACs. They have the superheroes who think like hackers and think like cyber criminals, and can help you be proactive in how you're building controls and technologies. It's about the people, it's about the process, it's about the technology. One without the other, you will fail. So it has to be a holistic approach. So you need folks who can think like the bad guys and help you build the process and the technology to protect yourself.
And, you know, when Jason and his folks are, or let's say, for example, one of the things you can do is have a pen test, or, you know, some type of periodic white hat investigation or penetration, however you want to call it. What frustrates me from an audit perspective is if there are findings, I don't care if they're moderate, low, or high, you've got to demonstrate to me, and you want to demonstrate to everybody in the organization, A, they may not be applicable, but more often than not, demonstrate to me what you did to remediate. Don't just take the report. Now remediate. And so often I just see the report, yeah, that's great, I had it done, bam. The more important thing is to remediate whatever's found.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And honestly, you know, over the course of close to a decade now, my philosophy as a cybersecurity leader is not just to show vulnerabilities to customers, it's to put them on a path of remediation. The value that we bring to the table is we can come in and find the business risk, find the technology risk, find the technology debt that's going to present business risk to your organization. But we have the knowledge and the skills to put that on a roadmap for you for remediation and tell you how to remediate it, right? So that way we're leaving our customers better than we found them. And that's something that I think is extremely important these days. You can get, you know, any cybersecurity organization. I mean, you know, there's so many organizations out there jumping on the cyber bandwagon. Right now, it's about having a strategic partner who understands your business, who can put you on a path to remediation and a very strong security posture. And really, it's the holistic approach of here's what's wrong, here's where you need to be. We've identified the gaps, we've ranked them by risk. Now let's get you on a path to remediation and get that done. It's a strategic approach, not a tactical approach.
It seems like every day cybersecurity breaches are hitting the front page that have board of directors and business leaders rethinking their approach to their digital footprint. In fact, last night I was trying to relax. I was watching Chicago Fire, and what happened? The 911 system was hacked, taken control by the bad guys for ransomware. I couldn't even relax without thinking about this stuff. So, Jason, How do you think organizations should become proactive and anticipate what the next wave of threats would be?
Yeah, so again, I think it's the ecosystem we talked about a little earlier, right? It's creating that ecosystem of, number one, threat intelligence partners or organizations that you can partner with, like the ISACs, where you can get information. It's having a very strong cybersecurity partner who can help you from the technical perspective. It's having a strong risk assessment organization who can work with you on building controls, assessing current controls, assessing your people and processes, so that way it can put you on a path of resilience. Again, where our backs are against the wall when it comes to things like talent out there in the industry to help. So that's why I keep saying it's a shared responsibility. It takes a village to accomplish this, and it's about having strategic business partners in your corner who can help guide you through this very, very complex and concerning time. It really, truly is. We have a lot of pressure coming down from regulatory bodies, from legal entities, from privacy law and international privacy law. Insurance organizations are now stepping up to the plate saying, we will not insure you unless you meet a minimum level of cybersecurity posture. So there's tons of pressure. There's pressure on boards of directors because now liability falls on them when it comes to cybersecurity, and negligence is no longer an excuse, right? You can't say I'm ignorant to the fact, for this level of negligence. It's actually negligence in the court of law now. They're viewing it as negligence if you're not securing your organization. So there's so much pressure on organizations, not to mention what happens if we're down. So really it does. It takes business partnerships. It takes partnerships in the industry to be able to build that holistic program for organizations to be resilient. It takes a village these days.
Dan, a couple of follow-ups on that topic. How much do I need to talk to my board about cyber stuff?
More often than not. It's interesting. You look over the last 10 years where we've come, but I would, it's a governance issue. And for those of you on the webinar, I'm sure you might be a member of a board. Maybe it's your own company, or it might be an outside board. You have a governance responsibility, and you should. I know the board I'm on, cybersecurity, IT security is a standing agenda item we talk about monthly, and we've developed a package that management submits to us relative to certain things. Some of it is granular, some of it does not get covered during the meeting, but it's available in a portal that the members have a responsibility to review prior to the meeting. It really, the board has to take things seriously, especially in a regulated environment. Jason touched upon earlier about, how this is starting to get mandated at the federal level. Henry, if you think back a couple of years ago, right, the SEC was having undertones of mandating this for registrants on the stock exchange. So you got to take it seriously. And even if you're in a privately held organization, you should take it seriously because, Jason alluded to insurance. Demonstrate active governance over the operations of the company. Why don't you have a cybersecurity plan? Why doesn't the board talk about that and take an interest in it? Mm-hmm. So it's, again, gone are the days where you could be a board member and get your per diem or whatever it was, and have some coffee with the girls and guys. You got to be active and take that governance issue seriously.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We're at a point in the industry now, and lots of C-level executives are talking about this. Financial risk and cyber risk should be part of every conversation that C-level executives are having, right? Because they're one and the same these days. Every organization leverages some type of technology to operate. It's critical mass. It is a utility these days in order to operate as a business. Cybersecurity business risk conversations should be part of every board meeting. Every single one. It's a necessity these days. Just one of the most recent pressures that's coming down, the Department of Justice has just come out and said the federal government will sue you if you neglect to report a breach, if you are a federal contractor and or you receive any type of federal grant money. Think about that, right? Not only a federal contractor, not only someone who's tied to the, the DoD from a business perspective or vendor perspective, but if you receive grant money from the federal government, they reserve the right to sue you if you don't properly, disclose a breach of information. So that's even more pressure coming from the federal government that we need to be thinking about as boards and as C-level executives.
And never mind that their house needs to get in order too, right? Don't do as I do as I say, right? But
I completely agree. So it's that blessing and the curse that's coming forward here, right? As a cybersecurity professional, I appreciate the fact that the federal government's trying to change hearts and minds and really push toward organizations being more cyber resilient, because again, it's a necessity. I mean, this is a national security issue, and it's an economic risk these days. It really is. It's something that's a huge risk to our economy. So I applaud that, but at the same time, the hypocrisy of them trying to get their house in order is still there. But at the end of the day, if it's helping our customers and it's helping our businesses get more secure, so be it.
I used to be a selectman. We would call these unfunded mandates.
Yes.
Where the government tells you to do something but doesn't give you the cash to do it. I'm sorry.
Let's get back off the political train for a second. For so long, it was always said that it was an IT department issue. Now it's become more of a board governance issue. So I appreciate both of your comments in that vein. A question for both of you. Should I get cyber insurance? Dan, want to hit that first?
I'm going to let Jason, because I think we might have a little bit of a different opinion on that.
Well, I mean,
I'll let him respond.
At the end of the day, my foundation of my response is going to be, it's becoming a requirement. We talked about vendor risk management earlier, and one of the top vendor risk management questions you're going to get is, do you have cyber liability insurance, right? And what is that? What's your coverage worth? As an IT services organization, that happens every single day. In order for me to do business with you, because in many instances you have the keys to the castle for our data and our systems, do you have active cyber liability insurance? And if you answer that question with a no, they will refuse to do business with you. So it's becoming a requirement as far as vendor third-party risk assessment comes to play. I'm at a point where I think we're not going to be able to get away from the necessity to have a rider for cyber liability insurance.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, I understand, and it's one of those things you have to have it. My issue with, and this is odd coming from someone who spends his time auditing IT security. My issue, it's not an issue, my concern with cyber insurance is I don't want my clients using it as a crutch.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
100%.
I don't want that to be, well, crap, if something happens, I got my cyber insurance. Well, you know what? How many insurance companies like to pay? I don't know too many, and I apologize if anybody watching is with an insurance company. But, so just be careful. That's all I would counsel you on. Be careful. Go back to your risk assessment. Understand where your exposure is and understand what is available for you to protect. And make sure you have someone to help you out, okay? Make sure you understand the policies. When cyber insurance first came out, and this is a while ago, I'm dating myself, there would be vague references to IT best practices. Well, what the heck is that? Jason might have a best practice that I don't necessarily think is a best practice for my organization, but it's sitting in there as a best practice. You got to, make sure that policy is doable from your perspective. And then, unfortunately, as Jason said, you better adhere to it. The only other thing I would say is just be careful. We all get alerts. I get tons of alerts from various insurance companies warning me about or discussing something as it relates in the realm of cybersecurity. Does in fact that I get that alert, if I don't act upon it, am I violating my cyber insurance policy? I don't know. Maybe, right? Maybe that's a best practice I should have. Just understand the policy. Get somebody to help you out.
Yeah, and Dan, that's a great point, right? I mean, it's again, it's one of those conversations of the blessing and the curse that comes with it, right? So number one, you
Right.
have some level of cyber liability coverage, but in the age of ransomware and what we've seen over the last few years, cyber insurance organizations are getting very smart, right? They handed out a lot of money during the ransomware days, which are still here. But the days are gone of a 5-question questionnaire about your cybersecurity posture from your insurance organization. Now I have customers who their cyber liability insurance organization actually scans them during the month, every month, so that way they can test their posture, because these insurance organizations need to know what type of risk they're taking on, right? Because they don't want to be paying millions of dollars in ransomware. So they're getting smart. They lost a lot of money with that. So the scrutiny from insurance organizations is extremely high these days. The other place I would caution you is if you're attesting to your security posture, that's a legal document to the insurance organization saying, I swear I have all this in place and I can show you. If you ever want to ask for it, I can show you. So unfortunately, I've seen clients who've attested to those type of controls, and when we get involved, they did not have those type of controls, and that would have affected their liability insurance payout, right? Because now the insurance organization says, you attested to having XYZ in place, you really did not. You were exposed to attack, you're exposed to a breach, we will not pay. We won't pay for incident response, we will not pay for your remediation, we will not pay to recover your business. So they're put in a precarious situation where now they have to pay out of pocket because insurance won't cover them because they didn't do the diligence in that attestation.
So Dan, what are my responsibilities if I've had a breach or I think I've had a breach?
Well, hopefully you activate your incident response plan that I spoke about earlier. But it really, I mean, it's a function of your industry. It's a function of the nature of the breach. It's a function of what's the likelihood of the breach exposing something. If it's subject to what regulations you're falling under. I mean, is HIPAA part of your world? Is, if you're in Massachusetts or any of the 50 states now for that matter, there are privacy laws that each one probably spells out a different threshold for reporting a breach. The first thing is to do, if your incident response plan should identify what happened, what our exposure is, and then that'll drive what you need to do and who you need to contact. It's interesting. I had a client, and Jason, you may have been familiar with this. I had a client a couple of weeks ago. They were impacted by the Kaseya breach or the Kaseya virus, and they acknowledged that they have a great third-party provider. And they were right on it, right? They did their diagnosis. We're talking over July 4th weekend now, all right? They were peeling back the onion, doing everything. They came to the conclusion of, we weren't exposed. But you know what they did, which is incredible, and I'm not recommending this. It just tells you the type of client they are and the relationship they have with their customers. They told their customers anyways. Okay, they went and spent each customer, told them what had happened, identified what they've done, and you want to talk about great client service? Many of their customers applauded them for doing that. I'm not saying you have to notify your customers. All I'm saying is have your plan, your incident response plan in place, and let that drive who you need to notify.
Yeah.
If you don't need to notify someone, I could argue then don't, right? Because that could negatively impact you in terms of public perception. But it's really a function of that IRP. Go ahead, Jason.
No, I couldn't agree more, Dan. And incident response is essential these days. It's not a place where you want to fumble. I talk about incident response as muscle memory. This is somewhere where you need to have some level of muscle memory as an organization, and that requires testing and planning. So, and having that plan that you can constantly look at, update, and test, because at the end of the day, the first step, and let's kind of take a step back. There's a difference between a security incident and a breach. There's a difference there, right? A security incident is something that potentially could have happened from a security exposure perspective. A breach is it's a loss of data, it's a loss of intellectual property, right? So that's a breach of information. So there's a difference. And when you institute that incident response plan as a partner who helps our customers with this, the first thing we do is detection and identification. Number one, let's go in there and detect what happened and identify the type, the severity, and the impact, right? It's essential to determine the nature of what happened. And then from there, a good incident response plan will direct your path, right? So let's say it's a high severity because there was data impacted and there's legal ramifications. The first thing you do is you get legal counsel involved, right? Now your incident response team is working with legal counsel, and we're talking about what has happened and if it constitutes a breach, whether regulatory or legal. If it does, now if you have cyber liability insurance, let's engage cyber liability insurance, because those pieces right there are very important, because now you institute attorney-client privilege as part of an incident response, which is extremely important in these cases. Extremely, extremely important to have that attorney-client privilege, so that way you can manage this incident if it is a breach effectively. Now you have cyber liability insurance. They can bring in forensic teams. They can bring in all of these capabilities now to help you through this breach and get you to recover in a timely fashion. So having those steps and testing those steps is extremely important. So that way you're not fumbling if something were to happen. You have muscle memory in exactly how you react to an incident.
Jason, you mentioned something about posture earlier, and I assume that wasn't whether I was sitting up straight in the chair. What are some of the current trends that you're seeing, both good and bad, as far as overall cybersecurity posture?
Yeah. I mean, so let's, I want the good news at the end. So let's start with some of the bad that we're seeing. Unfortunately, ransomware attacks have increased by 151%. So if you were to look at 2020 compared to now, the first 6 months of 2021, 151% increase. The disheartening part is they're new targets, but it's old attacks. It's old, tried and true attacks that are continuing to happen, that organizations are not securing themselves against, old vulnerabilities that have been out there for months, if not years. And honestly, seeing that is a little disheartening, because we want folks to be protecting themselves and keeping up with their security posture and keeping up with their vulnerability management programs. The other side, I had mentioned it earlier, is just the talent gap. Over the course of the last 3 years, it's just continually growing, and we can't get enough cybersecurity professionals. So that's why I keep saying today, it takes a village, right? It takes a village to be able to secure your organization. A lot of the trends as well is still challenges with remote workforce and digital transformation activities. Folks and organizations migrating to the cloud out of necessity to work through the pandemic and keep their businesses operating during the pandemic. Now we're starting to see, hey, wait a minute, I probably should have looked at our security posture and controls in these cloud platforms that I moved to, or part of my digital transformation program, and really taking that step back, because it was, in a lot of instances, a knee-jerk reaction to the pandemic and keeping your business up and running. I need technology now and I need it fast, otherwise my business is going to close. So now we need to take a look back and say, did you secure it? Is it secure? What are the risks? Let's harden that environment like we normally would have done as part of a true implementation plan, instead of something that needed to happen rapidly. And then the other concern I have is the human factor. So many breaches are happening because of social engineering, phishing, attacks, business email compromise. The human factor is still in play. So cyber awareness is huge. We're still in October. It's still Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So, leveraging a partner to help educate your organization, partnering with like the National Cybersecurity Alliance to get educational material, and really educating the folks who are on your staff, from end to end, whether it's a board member all the way down to the intern that started yesterday. Everybody needs some level of cybersecurity awareness training. Now, the good things that I'm seeing, and this is where hope, where I'm seeing hope and I'm seeing some momentum happening. We just talked about it. C-level executives and board involvement in cybersecurity conversations. those conversations are happening more and more at the board level, more and more at the executive leadership level. That gives me a ton of hope, because now organizations are looking at it as a true business risk and something that can honestly enable them as a business. A secure partner is a business differentiator these days. So having a high security posture that you can tout to your clients and people who do business with you can become a differentiator. The momentum we're seeing at the federal level, right? And the administration's focus, regulations and privacy laws and requirements starting to become a little bit more mandate to, again, to change hearts and minds and guide them through there. It's really that people process and the technology side. So folks asking questions of Dan and I about, hey, can we talk about NIST cybersecurity framework, right? Can we talk about different ways to build cybersecurity programs? Having SOC audits. I'm starting to see momentum with folks doing proactive audits of their environment. And now the technology is really coming into play, and it's maturing, and more of those technology manufacturers are focusing on cybersecurity within their platforms and their environment. So identity and access management is maturing. The endpoint detection, because we're in a hybrid workforce, is maturing. And then folks having conversations around things like zero trust. And I don't talk about zero trust in the marketing fashion that most ads you're seeing from technology providers. I'm talking about the architecture of zero trust within your organization that honestly is a culmination of 20 years of best practice that's now just getting a marketing term laid upon it. But it is truly that layered security in zero trust that's important from a foundational architecture perspective within your organization. So again, people, process, and technology are maturing in front of me, and that's where I'm seeing hope.
Dan, what are some no-brainer cyber prevention techniques?
Oh, let's see, where to start? Well, we talked, Jason talked about security training. The only thing I would add to that, if you hire someone to provide you, let's say, with a phishing service, with phishing with a P, make sure the content is realistic, and make sure the content is what people in your organization would normally experience. Because, a generic phishing email, I got to tell you, if you flunk that, then holy cow, right? I mean, make sure the provider provides you with a facility to really try to trick people, for lack of a better term, because it's in everybody's best interest. You can talk, forever about password management, password policies. If you have multiple environments that you're working on, consider SSO or single sign-on, okay? As you're migrating to, zero trust, use SSO as an interim solution. That allows for better password management. It allows for better identity management, and it's relatively inexpensive. It's been out there for God knows how, 3, 4, 5 years. There's a lot of good providers. We talked about firewalls. We talked about making sure you had some type of routine pen testing or routine vulnerability scanning of your environment. That's a given. Patching, make sure you're patched. I mean, it's incredible to me that I still see servers or environments that are missing patches. And I'm not talking about, I'm 2 weeks late. I'm talking about 10 months late. So make sure your environments are patched. Always make sure you have good backups. Make sure those backups are tested. And if you can, have the backup process segmented from the regular environment, right? Because if your environment gets infiltrated, chances are if your backup is part of that environment, that's going to be infiltrated. So long backups. So if you could segment the backup into a separate environment from your regular network environment, that's really good. And obviously keep testing them. And in terms of remote access, Jason touched upon it. I'm a big proponent. If you're remote work is here to stay, folks, right? As much as you may like it or not like it, it's here to stay. Consider having company issued assets versus somebody working at home on their own PC. It's a method of strengthening control. Lock it down so they can't print locally. Lock it down so they can't write to local drives. And if possible, have them set up a separate router so it's on a separate network environment so that, little Joey with his game on his his iPad or his iPod isn't infiltrating your corporate environment by jumping on that router. So there's a host of others, but that's a good place to start. And make sure, obviously, your antivirus is up to date and all sorts of stuff related to patching.
Yeah, well, one thing I want to add, Dan, just as kind of a tidbit for everyone, and this is on your personal life as well, not just your business life. MFA, 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 MFA. I don't want to say, I'll say it a million times. Have multi-factor authentication enabled on your personal email, your bank accounts, anything and everything that has any type of sensitive information. Put that dual factor authentication on there so folks can't compromise your passwords. You know, that we talked about the phishing exercise. It just reminds me of our last ethical hacking webinar and the story there. If you didn't see it, go check it out. It's actually pretty funny on how we were so successful on building a phishing email with our techniques. But again, those phishing exercises would have been thwarted with multi-factor authentication in the way. We would not have been able to scrape passwords if we had dual-factor authentication in play. We wouldn't have been able to steal those passwords. So super, super important in personal life and for business.
And just, MFA, obviously very important. You touched upon remote banking. For those of you, and I'm sure many people do remote banking now, right? In your environment, try to keep that machine that you're using for remote banking separate from everything else. Okay, keep it separately, keep it isolated. Don't let anybody add it physically as well as logically. And obviously, if you can, try to invest in some data loss prevention software. A lot of email providers provide a similar a low-end DLP. Look at that and make sure, obviously, data is encrypted at rest as well as encrypted in transit. In the old days, when I was knee-high to a grasshopper, IT used to complain about encrypting stuff because they said it used too much computing time. That's kind of hogwash now. You should be able to encrypt stuff at rest without degrading your environment.
60 seconds or less. Your final thoughts, Dan?
Do your risk assessment and make sure you have an incident response plan, because as we've been saying all month, it's not when, it's if. Jason talked about the difference between a security event and a breach. If you've been caught in a phishing scam, that's a security event. It may seem benign and it may have been contained. That's a security event. So make sure you do a good risk assessment, do a good IRP. And I've enjoyed the last hour. If you have any questions, reach out. Hopefully you got something out of this. And Jason, over to you.
Yeah, so one tidbit is, organizations don't have to be spending millions of dollars on security posture. Like I mentioned earlier, it's people, process, and technology in combination. And in that order, to be honest with you, having risk assessments and having a partner who can come in and evaluate the current state of your organization will set your people up for success, help you institute the right processes, and then align the right technologies to your organization. That's the key to success. You don't have to be spending millions. There's a ton of best practices out there that probably come innate within the systems you already have that you can start implementing now, right? It takes a village, it takes partnerships. We can get through this together. It's tough times, a lot of pressure, but again, we can get our organizations resilient and secure.
Well, I want to thank you both for your time. This was filled with a lot of useful information. I'm not sure whether I've got more questions that will come of this, but again, thank you, Jason. Thank you, Dan. Jeremy, I know you want to just jump in, but thank you everyone for spending the last hour with us.
Absolutely. I'll just echo that. Thank you very, very much. As the panelists said here, Cybersecurity Awareness Month, what a great way to end this. Certainly, if you have any additional questions, please reach out to KLR, reach out to us at Envision. We will also be following up with a quick survey after this, so you can let us know what you thought. We're always trying to improve the content that we bring you. So if you take a few seconds to answer that survey, it gives us an incredibly valuable information. Other than that, thank you to our panelists, thank you to Henry, and thank you to all of our attendees. Stay safe. We'll see you all soon.